The town of Coldwater, Alaska, had exactly 847 residents when Elijah and Emma Parker became orphans on a Tuesday morning in late November. The news spread through the fishing docks, the general store, and the single diner on Main Street before the Coast Guard had even finished recovering the wreckage. James and Catherine Parker, beloved members of the community, had drowned when their fishing boat capsized during an unexpected storm 3 miles off the coast. Their bodies were found holding each other. Elijah and Emma were 12 years old. Twins. Identical in their silence as they sat in the principal's office at Coldwater Elementary, wrapped in donated blankets that smelled like someone else's home. "Do you have any family we can call?" Principal Anderson asked gently, her voice the kind of soft that made everything feel worse. The twins looked at each other. They had perfected this over 12 years, communicating without words, finishing each other's thoughts, knowing when to speak and when to stay silent. "No one," Elijah finally said. Emma added quietly, "Mom said we didn't have family. Just us." Principal Anderson's expression confirmed what the twins already feared. Foster care. Separation. Different homes, different families, different lives. The social worker arrived the next day. Margaret Chin had kind eyes and tired hands that shuffled papers with the efficiency of someone who had done this too many times. "I'm going to be honest with you both," she said, sitting across from them in the conference room at the school. "Finding a placement for twins your age is difficult. Most families want younger children, or they can only take one. We stay together," Emma said immediately. "We stay together," Elijah repeated. Margaret Chin sighed, the kind of sigh that carried years of impossible situations and heartbroken children. "I'll do everything I can," she promised. "But you need to understand." The door opened abruptly. A man in his 60s entered, wearing a wool suit that looked expensive but outdated, carrying a leather briefcase that had seen better decades. "Excuse the interruption," he said formally. "I'm looking for Elijah and Emma Parker." "And you are?" Margaret Chin stood, instantly protective. "Theodore Blackwell, attorney. I represent the estate of Samuel Parker." The name meant nothing to the twins. "Who?" Elijah asked. Theodore Blackwell opened his briefcase and removed a thick folder. "Samuel Parker was your great-uncle. Your grandfather's brother. He passed away 6 weeks ago, and his will has just been processed through probate." He placed a document on the table. "He left everything to you." The reading of the will took place 3 days later in Blackwell's small office above the hardware store. Word had spread through Coldwater with the speed of all gossip in small towns, and somehow half the town found reasons to be on Main Street that afternoon, watching the twins climb the narrow stairs. Inside, Blackwell sat behind a desk covered with maps and property deeds. "Your great-uncle Samuel was, by all accounts, a recluse," Blackwell began. "He purchased property in the northern mountains 43 years ago and lived there alone until his death. No one in town knew him well. He came down perhaps twice a year for supplies, paid in cash and left immediately." "Why did he leave us anything?" Emma asked. "We never met him." "The will doesn't explain his reasoning," Blackwell replied. "Only his intentions." He unfolded a map across the desk. His finger traced a route from Coldwater north into the mountains, stopping at a hand-drawn X. "This is the property. Approximately 160 acres of forested mountain land, and a cabin built by Samuel himself. According to his will, the property, the cabin, and all contents therein are bequeathed entirely to both of you, jointly, in perpetuity." Elijah leaned forward, studying the map. "How far is it?" 30 miles north. Accessible only by snowmobile in winter, by four-wheeler in summer. There's no road. The nearest neighbor is 14 miles away. Margaret Chin, who had accompanied the twins, shook her head. "This is inappropriate. These are children. They can't live alone in the wilderness." "The will includes a trust," Blackwell continued, ignoring her. "Enough to cover property taxes for the next 50 years and provide a modest monthly stipend for supplies. However, there are conditions." He adjusted his reading glasses. "Both children must agree to take possession of the property. Both must live there. If they refuse or if they abandon the property before turning 18, everything reverts to the state." "This is insane," Margaret said. "You're asking two 12-year-old orphans to survive alone in a cabin in the Alaskan wilderness?" "I'm reading a legal document," Blackwell replied calmly. "The choice is theirs." The twins looked at each other. That silent communication, perfected over 12 years. "Can we see it?" Emma asked. "The cabin?" "I don't recommend it," Blackwell said. "Winter is here. The route is dangerous even for experienced outdoorsmen. And frankly, I don't believe the cabin is habitable. Samuel was elderly, possibly mentally unsound. The structure is likely unsafe. Can we see it? Elijah repeated. Blackwell studied them both for a long moment. I can arrange a guide to take you tomorrow. But understand, this isn't a choice you should make lightly. That cabin is known locally as the Frozen Tomb. No one survives a winter up there. Samuel barely did, and he had 40 years of experience. Margaret tried to protest, but the twins had already decided. They would see the cabin. They would decide together. And they would stay together no matter what. The guide's name was Roy Hemlock, a weathered man in his 50s who made his living taking hunters into the backcountry. He arrived at dawn with 2 snowmobiles and enough skepticism to fill the trailer he pulled behind his truck. This is a bad idea, he announced, helping the twins into insulated gear he'd brought. I'm only doing this because Blackwell paid me in advance and because I remember your parents. Good people. The journey north took 4 hours. The town disappeared behind them within 30 minutes, replaced by wilderness so vast and white that it hurt to look at. Trees heavy with snow stood like silent witnesses. The sky was the color of old bones. Roy stopped twice to check his GPS, muttering about how Samuel had chosen the most remote location possible. Your great-uncle was either very smart or very paranoid, he shouted over the engine noise. Maybe both. The terrain grew rougher. They climbed elevations that made Emma's ears pop. The temperature dropped so low that their breath froze instantly into tiny crystals. Finally Roy stopped. There, he said, pointing. At first, the twins saw nothing but snow and trees. Then Elijah noticed the shape. A cabin, partially buried in snow, built low against the mountainside as if trying to hide from the sky. Dark wood, almost black, blending into the shadows of the forest. A stone chimney rose from one end, crusted with ice. It looked abandoned. It looked dead. I'll wait here, Roy said firmly. 30 minutes. Then we're leaving whether you're ready or not. The twins approached the cabin slowly, their boots crunching through snow that came up to their knees. Up close, the structure looked more solid than they'd expected. The logs were thick, fitted together with precision. The windows were small and shuttered. The door was unlocked. Elijah pushed it open and the hinges made no sound. Inside was darkness. Emma found a flashlight on a hook just inside the door, exactly where someone would put it if they expected visitors who arrived in the dark. The beam cut through the interior and both twins stopped breathing. The cabin wasn't abandoned. It was waiting. The main room was small but immaculately organized. A wood stove sat cold and clean in the corner. Shelves lined the walls, filled with canned goods, jars of preserved vegetables, bags of rice and beans. A table stood in the center with 2 chairs. 2 plates. 2 cups. 2 sets of silverware laid out precisely. Everything in pairs. Everything for 2 people. Emma's flashlight swept across the far wall and stopped. Photographs. Dozens of them, tacked to the wood in careful rows. The twins approached slowly. The first photograph showed a young man in his 20s, standing in front of this same cabin when it was newly built, smiling with pride. The second showed the same man, older, with a woman and 2 small children. The third showed the man alone again, much older, gray-haired, holding up a fish he'd caught. But it was the final row of photographs that made Emma reach for Elijah's hand. Pictures of their parents. Young, maybe in their early 20s, standing in front of this cabin. Smiling. Their mother pregnant. He knew them, Emma whispered. Elijah moved to the table. Beneath one of the plates was an envelope, yellowed with age. His name and Emma's name were written on the front in careful handwriting. With trembling hands he opened it. The letter inside was dated 6 months before Samuel's death. Dear Elijah and Emma, if you are reading this, then I am gone and you have come to the place I built for you. I have never met you, but I have loved you since before you were born. Your grandfather was my brother. We built this cabin together many years ago, planning to create a refuge for our family. But we argued, as brothers do, about things that seem important at the time but mean nothing in the end. He returned to town. I stayed here. I watched from a distance as your parents grew up. I saw them marry. I saw them choose a life in Coldwater, surrounded by people and noise and the things I had left behind. I wanted to reach out. I wanted to be part of their lives. But pride is a poison, and I drank deeply from that well for too many years. When I learned you were born, 2 of you, together from the start, I knew I had been given a purpose. I would build something for you. A place where you would be safe if the world ever took your parents away. I hoped you would never need this cabin. But I prepared it anyway. Everything here is yours. The cabin, the land, the supplies, and something more that you will find when you are ready. Stay together. Trust each other. Survive. You are Parkers and Parkers endure. Your great-uncle, Samuel. Elijah read the letter aloud while Emma held the flashlight steady. When he finished, neither of them spoke. Outside, Roy honked the snowmobile horn. Time was up. But the twins didn't move. Emma walked to the shelves and pulled down a can. Peaches. The label was recent, not expired. She opened a drawer beneath the shelf. Inside were can openers, utensils, fire starters, matches and waterproof containers. Elijah opened a door on the right side of the room. A small bedroom with bunk beds, both made with clean blankets. Wool socks laid out on each bed. Coats hanging on hooks sized for children. Another door revealed a second bedroom, identical to the first. Everything deliberate. Everything prepared. Everything waiting for them. Roy honked again, longer this time. The twins returned to the main room and stood together in the center, their flashlight beams crossing. "We can't survive out here alone," Emma said quietly. "We can't survive being separated," Elijah replied. Silence. "Mom and Dad were here," Emma said, touching the photograph on the wall. "They knew about this place. Samuel loved them," Elijah added. "He loved us. Everyone will say we're crazy. Everyone already thinks we have nothing." Emma looked around the cabin one more time. At the supplies. The care. The love that had built this place over decades of solitude. "We stay together," she said. "We stay together," Elijah agreed. They walked back outside where Roy was already starting his snowmobile, ready to leave. "We're not coming back," Elijah announced. Roy killed the engine. "What?" "We're staying," Emma said. "This is ours. We're staying." "Your children," Roy said, his voice sharp with disbelief. "You can't." "The will says it's ours if we both agree to live here," Elijah interrupted. "We both agree." "You'll die," Roy said flatly. "The first real storm will kill you. You have no experience, no training, no idea what you're doing." "Then teach us," Emma said. Roy stared at them both, his expression shifting from disbelief to something that might have been respect. "You're serious." "We're serious," they said together. Roy was quiet for a long time, his breath fogging in the cold air. "Your great-uncle," he finally said. "I only met him a few times. He came into town maybe twice a year, bought supplies, didn't talk much. But one time about 5 years ago, I helped him carry something heavy to his truck. A generator. He looked at me and said, 'I'm building something for children who will need it.' I thought he was crazy." Roy looked at the cabin, then back at the twins. Maybe he wasn't. He pulled his satellite phone from his pocket. "I'll call Blackwell. Tell him you're invoking your rights under the will. But I'm also calling the state and reporting this situation. They'll probably try to stop you." "Let them try," Elijah said. The next week became a battle. Margaret Chin arrived with 2 state social workers, demanding the twins return to Coldwater immediately. Attorney Blackwell countered with the legal language of Samuel's will, which was ironclad. The twins were the rightful owners, and the will stipulated no age restrictions on possession. The state threatened to petition for guardianship based on safety concerns. Blackwell threatened to sue for violation of property rights and testamentary freedom. The local newspaper ran a headline, "Orphan Twins Choose Frozen Tomb Over Foster Care." The town was divided. Some thought the twins were brave. Most thought they were doomed. A compromise was reached. The state would allow the twins to remain on the property under the following conditions: weekly check-ins via satellite phone, monthly in-person welfare visits, and proof of adequate supplies and heating. If at any point conditions were deemed unsafe, the twins would be removed immediately. Roy Hemlock, perhaps feeling responsible or perhaps remembering Samuel's words about children who would need help, volunteered to make the monthly supply runs and teach the twins basic survival skills. "I give you 2 weeks before you're begging to come back to town," Roy said on the first day of training, standing in front of the cabin with the twins. "But until then, I'm going to teach you how not to die." He taught them how to split wood correctly so they wouldn't injure themselves. How to maintain the fire in the stove so it burned all night without consuming too much fuel. How to layer clothing to prevent hypothermia. How to recognize the signs of frostbite. How to ration food and water. How to use the chemical toilet Samuel had installed. How to operate the emergency radio. But most importantly, Roy showed them the cabin's hidden features, things Samuel had built that weren't immediately obvious. There was a secondary heat source, a propane heating system with tanks buried outside, accessed through a small hatch in the floor. There was a root cellar beneath the cabin, accessible through a trapdoor under the kitchen area, where the ground temperature stayed constant and food could be stored for months. There was a water collection system that channeled melted snow from the roof into purified storage tanks. There were emergency supplies hidden in false panels in the walls. First aid kits, additional food, batteries, tools. Your great-uncle was paranoid, Roy said. But the good kind of paranoid. On the night before Roy's first departure, leaving the twins alone for the first time, he sat with them at the small table. "I'm going to ask you one more time," he said seriously. "Are you sure about this?" Elijah and Emma looked at each other, then nodded. "We're sure." "Why?" Roy asked. "Really? Why would you choose this over a warm house in town, regular meals, school friends?" Emma spoke first. "Because if we go to town they'll separate us. Maybe not immediately but eventually. No one wants to adopt 12-year-old twins. We'll end up in different homes, different schools, different lives." Elijah continued. "Our parents are dead. We have no family except each other. But Samuel left us this. He prepared this place for us specifically. He knew we might need it. And he was right. This is our home now," Emma finished. "It's the only home we have left." Roy nodded slowly. "Then I'll tell you something I didn't mention before. About a year ago, I saw Samuel in town one last time. He was sick, you could see it in his face. He stopped me on the street and handed me an envelope. Said to give it to the children who inherited his place, but only after they'd survived their first month alone. He pulled an envelope from his jacket and placed it on the table. 1 month from today I'll bring your supplies. If you're still here, this is yours." Then Roy left, his snowmobile engine fading into the distance until there was nothing but silence and snow and 2 children alone in the wilderness. That first night, the twins lay in their separate bedrooms, each in their own bunk, listening to the wind. The cabin creaked. The stove hissed. The darkness outside was absolute. "Elijah?" Emma called softly. "Yeah. I'm scared." Silence. "Me too." But neither of them suggested leaving. The first week was the hardest. Every task took 3 times longer than it should have. Building a fire required multiple attempts. Cooking on the wood stove burned half their food. The cold was a living thing that found every gap in their clothing, every crack in the cabin walls. They learned by necessity and failure. They learned that if you let the fire die during the night, the morning temperature inside the cabin would drop below freezing and everything would ice over. They learned that wet socks were worse than no socks. They learned that the silence of the wilderness wasn't really silence at all. It was filled with sounds they'd never noticed before. Ice cracking. Snow sliding off trees. Animals moving through the darkness. They learned to conserve their phone battery, using it only for the required weekly check-ins with Margaret Chin. "Are you safe?" she would ask every time. "Yes." "Are you warm?" "Yes." "Are you eating enough?" "Yes." "Do you want to come back to town?" "No." By the second week they had established a routine. Wake at dawn. Build up the fire. Melt snow for water. Cook breakfast, usually oatmeal with canned fruit. Spend the morning on chores, splitting wood, checking supplies, cleaning, maintaining equipment. Spend the afternoon exploring the property, learning the land, discovering what Samuel had built beyond the main cabin. And they did discover things. A smokehouse for preserving meat, though they didn't yet know how to hunt. A storage shed filled with tools, spare parts and materials for repairs. A greenhouse frame, collapsed under snow, that could potentially be rebuilt in spring. Animal tracks everywhere. Rabbits, deer, something larger that might have been a moose. But the most significant discovery came during the 3rd week. Emma was reorganizing the root cellar, taking inventory of the supplies, when she noticed something odd. One wall of the cellar was different from the others. Rougher, newer wood that didn't match the aged logs of the original construction. She pressed on it experimentally. Moved. "Elijah," she called up through the trapdoor. "Come down here." Together they examined the wall. It wasn't actually a wall at all. It was a door, cleverly disguised and held in place by a simple latch hidden behind a support beam. Elijah released the latch. The door swung open. Behind it was a tunnel, carved directly into the rock of the mountainside, supported by wooden beams and lit by their flashlight beams stretching into darkness. "What is this?" Emma whispered. They followed the tunnel. It descended gradually, the air growing colder and drier. After about 50 feet, it opened into a chamber. The chamber was larger than the cabin itself, and it was filled with supplies. Metal shelving units lined the walls, stacked with boxes and crates. Industrial-grade storage containers. Water barrels. Medical supplies. Tools. Equipment. Enough food to feed a family for years. But that wasn't all. In the center of the chamber was a table with a locked metal box. And on top of the box was another envelope with their names. Elijah and Emma. If you have found this chamber, you have survived long enough to prove you are serious about making this place your home. What you see here represents 40 years of preparation. Every month I brought supplies. Every season I added more. Not for myself, I needed very little. But for you. The box contains 3 things. First, documents proving legal ownership of this property, copies stored in 3 separate locations to prevent loss. Second, maps of the entire 160 acres, including water sources, hunting grounds, dangerous areas, and emergency shelters I built throughout the property. Third, my journals. 40 years of learning how to survive in this place. Every mistake I made so you won't make them. Every success I achieved so you can repeat them. The key to the box is hidden where only children would think to look. Inside the wooden horse in the main cabin. Trust yourselves. Trust each other. You are stronger than you know. Samuel. They ran back through the tunnel, up into the root cellar, into the main cabin. The wooden horse sat on a shelf above the stove, a carved toy, old and worn, something Emma had assumed was just decoration. She lifted it down. It was heavier than it should have been. The base unscrewed. Inside was a key. Back in the chamber, the key fit perfectly. Inside the metal box they found everything Samuel had promised. The legal documents were professionally prepared, notarized, with copies filed with attorneys in 3 different cities. The property was indisputably theirs. The maps were works of art, hand-drawn with incredible detail, noting everything from the best places to find firewood to seasonal migration patterns of game animals. But the journals were the real treasure. 43 leather-bound books, 1 for each year Samuel had lived on this mountain. The twins carried them back to the cabin and read by firelight. Samuel's first entries were those of a young man, angry and hurt by family conflict, determined to prove he could survive alone. He wrote about the backbreaking work of building the cabin by hand. About the loneliness that nearly broke him. About the winters that tested every skill he had. But gradually the tone changed. He wrote about finding peace in solitude. About learning to read the weather. About the satisfaction of growing his own food. About becoming part of the land rather than fighting against it. And then about 20 years in, the entry shifted again. He started writing about purpose. I saw my nephew's children today, he wrote. Twins. A boy and a girl. They don't know I exist, but I know them. I watched from a distance as they played on the beach. They moved together like 2 parts of a whole. If anything ever happens to my nephew and his wife, these children will need protection. They will need a place to be safe. I will build it for them. Entry after entry documented Samuel's growing obsession with preparing the property for children he might never meet. He researched child nutrition and bought accordingly. He studied child psychology and designed spaces that would feel safe. He calculated growth rates and bought clothes in graduated sizes. He prepared. And prepared. And prepared. For 40 years. The final entry was written 2 weeks before Samuel's death, his handwriting shaky but determined. I am dying. The doctor confirmed what I already knew. But I am not afraid. I have completed my work. The cabin is ready. The supplies are stocked. The children will come and they will survive, and they will understand that love does not require presence. Sometimes love is preparation. Sometimes love is sacrifice. Sometimes love is building something you will never see completed and trusting that it will matter. I hope they forgive me for never reaching out. I hope they understand why I stayed away. I hope the place I built is enough. Emma closed the journal with tears streaming down her face. Elijah stared into the fire, his jaw tight. They sat in silence for a long time. He loved us, Emma finally said. He never met us, Elijah replied. He loved us anyway. Elijah nodded slowly. He gave us everything. The 1-month mark arrived with a snowstorm. Roy Hemlock came as promised, fighting through near whiteout conditions to deliver supplies and the envelope he'd been holding. He found the twins healthy, confident, and competent. The cabin was warm. Food was cooking on the stove. Wood was neatly stacked. Their clothes were clean and dry. You look good, Roy admitted, surprised. We're surviving, Elijah said. More than surviving, Emma added. Roy handed over the envelope Samuel had left. Inside was a simple message in a bank book. The message read, You have proven yourselves. The attached account contains funds for your education, your future, and the maintenance of this property. Use it wisely. Make me proud. The bank book showed an account with nearly $200,000. Roy whistled low when he saw the number. Your great-uncle was a wealthy man, he said. He lived like a pauper and saved everything. The twins stared at the number, trying to comprehend it. We don't need this much, Emma said. Not just for us. Elijah looked at his sister, and that silent communication passed between them again. Samuel built this place to save us, he said slowly. But what if we used it to save others? Emma nodded, understanding immediately. Other kids. Kids like us. Roy looked between them. What are you thinking? We're thinking, Elijah said, that this property is 160 acres. We have a cabin, a supply chamber, and money. We have everything we need to survive. But there are other kids out there who don't have anything. Kids who are going to be separated from their siblings, Emma continued. Kids who are going to be alone. Kids who need a place to go. You want to turn this into some kind of refuge? Roy asked. A home, Emma corrected. For kids who don't have one. Roy sat down heavily. That's a big idea. Samuel had 40 years to prepare for 2 kids, Elijah said. We have his journals, his maps, his supplies. We can learn what he knew. And then we can teach other kids. The state will never allow it, Roy warned. The state doesn't own this property, Emma replied. We do. Over the next month, the twins worked with attorney Blackwell to establish a legal framework for what they were envisioning. They created the Samuel Parker Foundation, a non-profit organization dedicated to providing temporary and long-term housing for orphan siblings at risk of separation. The foundation's mission was simple: keep families together. The property would serve as a residential camp where siblings could live, learn survival skills, receive education, and heal from trauma in a safe environment. The idea was radical. The state objected, citing safety concerns and lack of precedent. But Blackwell was a better lawyer than anyone expected. He argued that the twins had proven the viability of the property, that they had resources and support, and that the alternative, separating siblings and placing them in an overburdened foster system, was demonstrably worse. He also pointed out that the twins were willing to work within state oversight, hire licensed social workers and educators, and submit to regular inspections. The case drew media attention. A major news network ran a feature, Orphan Twins Build Hope in Alaska Wilderness. The segment showed Elijah and Emma confidently navigating their property, explaining their vision and sharing Samuel's story. Public opinion shifted dramatically. Donations began arriving. Volunteers offered their services. Contractors offered to help expand the facilities. Within 6 months, construction began on additional cabins using Samuel's original designs. Within a year, the first group of siblings arrived, 3 brothers aged 8, 10, and 12, who had been living in separate foster homes for 2 years. The twins welcomed them personally, showing them around the property, teaching them how to split wood and maintain fires and find their way using Samuel's maps. You're safe here, Emma told them. And you're together. That's what matters, Elijah added. The foundation grew carefully and intentionally. They never accepted more children than they could properly care for. They hired trauma counselors, teachers, and survival instructors. They built a school building, a medical clinic, and a communal dining hall. But they kept Samuel's original cabin untouched, a museum and memorial to the man who had started everything. By the time Elijah and Emma turned 16, they were managing a thriving community of 43 children and 15 staff members. The property that had once been called the Frozen Tomb was now known as Parker's Hope. Families who had laughed at the idea of 2 children surviving alone in the wilderness now sent donations and letters of support. The town of Coldwater, which had pitted the twins, now celebrated them as examples of resilience and vision. And deep in the mountains of Alaska, in a cabin built by a lonely man who never stopped loving his family, 2 orphans had created something that would outlive them all. A home for the lost, a refuge for the broken, and proof that love prepared in silence can echo for generations. On the 5th anniversary of their arrival at the property, Elijah and Emma stood together in front of Samuel's grave, a simple marker they had placed on a hill overlooking the entire property. Thank you, Emma said quietly to the stone. For everything, Elijah added. The wind moved through the trees. The sun set over the mountains. And 43 children who had once been told they had nothing went to sleep that night in warm beds, in safe rooms, surrounded by people who understood that family is not defined by blood but by choice, sacrifice, and the determination to never let go. Samuel Parker had died alone. But his legacy would never be lonely again.